Okay, so I'll just move to our next speaker now. So our next speaker is Kris Lengieza from Procore. I know that Kris has recently moved from California to Florida, and I know that like many of the speakers we spoke to in the lead up to the forum, he's quite enjoying his time with family and not traveling so much. One of the things that it's been quite a common theme from the speakers, and people starting to blend, family and work life. There's just some great sort of things coming out in the lead up to the forum. And what I'll do now is welcome Kris to the stage.
Kind of used to working with everyone across the globe as we work through, deploying technology out into the world. But what we're really here to talk about today is the power of platform, right? And how we can adapt to change using more open and more integrated technology. Before we dive too much into that, I'm going to do a real quick introduction about myself and tell you a little bit about my background and how I kind of got to this point. So my name's Kris Lengieza. I am the Senior Director of Business Development at Procore. I've spent about 15 years in the construction industry and really sat into a lot of different roles throughout my construction career. Worked my way up from a project engineer, superintendent, project manager, and then really always had a love for technology. Maybe it was a love for technology, or maybe it was just a love for not having to do any more work than I absolutely had to. So I really found myself in a place where I wanted to find ways to take technology and improve process, improve the way that we build, improve the way that my coworkers could spend their day, and really improve the way that we could deliver projects for our customers and our clients. And that's what brought me to Procore. I've spent the last 2 years plus doing what I think is one of the most fun jobs out there. I get to spend my time working with technology vendors and partners that want to work alongside our customers to build better workflows and to deliver what will be a better project, what will be a better built world, what will be a better place for all of us to live at the end of the day. So what gets me really excited. And I think what I like about that so much is that I get to talk to a lot of you that are in the industry and understand what your needs are and understand how it is that you do projects. And I also get to spend a lot of time with the technology providers, whether they be software vendors or consultants, and figure out what they have to bring to the table as well. So let's talk a little bit about where we are today. As many of you know, construction is a hard industry, right? It is extremely complex. There are a lot of stakeholders on any given project. And it's not just about one person or one team in construction. It is a true team sport. We have head contractors and subcontractors that are interacting with the owner and architects and engineers. Every single project is different. I mean, even if you're building the same Woolies store over and over again, the site conditions are different and the local municipality codes may be different. So it brings its own unique challenges. And every time we change up the team, we have different people, we have different designers, we potentially could have different subbies on the project. So we really do want to focus on the fact that it is complex and it is a network of people and contributors on these projects. And we're not always in the same place. We're mobile. We're working from the field. We're working from the office. We're working from some cases halfway across the globe. And things are constantly changing. We've all probably heard the joke before that the only constant in construction is change, and that the design is always changing because the design is never truly done until the project is done. We just force people to put their pencils down at some point. And that change is going to happen because of site conditions. That change is going to happen because of the people that show up on the job site, the delays in materials and the delays in labor that happen on every single project. All of this to say is that our industry is complex. But the good thing is the way that we are building is evolving, right? We've moved on from a place where things were analog, where everyone carried around rolls of paper plans underneath their arm. And still, many of us probably keep a couple in our back pocket, anyways. Or I've even seen it to a point where people are pulling rolls of drawings in little red wagons around the job site. We've moved past that. We've moved into an age and an era of internet and mobile and being able to have devices with information on them wherever we go, whether that is on the 32nd store of a high rise or that is on mile 35 of a pipeline project. But we have that information with us because the advancements in technologies have allowed us to take it with us. And the advancements in software have allowed us to do our jobs a little bit easier and a little bit better because of it. Now, where we're really excited to go is into an age of insights. And that is delivering information as you need it and alerting you to things that we need to understand. By leveraging all of the data and the information that is inside of these platforms, we have the ability to better understand what we need to do to get the project done. Now, there have been a lot of catalysts for driving technology adoption, right? One, we have increased speed and complexity on projects. In the US specifically, 44% of construction projects are starting to use things like design build. And we're starting to spend a lot more money, and the panel before us was talking about it, investing in the usage of BIM and standardization and those standards and how important they are. Now, this is really driving the need for better collaboration and communication and more real-time project visibility. Now, in addition to that, we're faced with a labor shortage. I don't think this is just a problem in the US. I think it's a problem globally. There's not enough people to do the work. And when we do have people to do the work, are they efficiently trained? We heard conversations about that in the previous panel about taking the opportunities to train up our workforce so that we can deliver better projects and have less rework. Now, what this value and what we need to do to solve this is having a single place to look for information and having better workflows so people aren't constantly chasing that information. They have what they need when they need it. And then lastly, the widespread access to mobility is incredibly important, right? Everyone walks around with a smartphone of some state, whether you're an Android or an iOS or Windows, or you're still rocking a BlackBerry. But those are only a way to consume information or to potentially contribute information. What's really important is that information and that data is being captured and shared at the workface, where the work is getting done. Now, these are not new problems. We've been talking about them for years, and we've been talking about these advancements and why we've been evolving our technology usage. But in the last 6 months, as many of you know, we've been struck by a global pandemic. It's the reason that I'm here talking to you through a computer screen instead of doing it in person. Now, the great thing about that is it's accelerating our digitization. It's accelerating, in a lot of cases, our adoption of many of these technologies. And that's really powerful because in speaking with some of my former coworkers from my former GC company, I was talking to them about technologies that they had implemented that they had maybe either never thought of using before or that they had failed to implement before. And one that hit near and dear to my heart was Microsoft Teams, right? It is something that I tried to implement at that company 3.5 years ago when I was still there and running technology and operational excellence. And the responses that I got were, we don't need this. It won't stand up to the pressure. If we're trying to submit a bid, it's going to fail. We're not going to be able to get the bid in. Do you want to be responsible for that? That was the challenge that nobody wanted to change the way they did things because they didn't feel that they had to. Now, COVID has been an interesting catalyst for that. Now these people couldn't physically sit in a room together and assemble a bid. They couldn't collect the numbers by having somebody walk in and hand them an envelope. with a bit inside of it. They had to come up with a better digital way. They had to come up with a better way to communicate, a better way for us to be face to face without actually being face to face. So COVID has been a very interesting catalyst for our adoption of technology. And the thing that's been so great about that is that it's breaking down preconceived notions about what could and couldn't be done with technologies that have been widely adopted in other industries, and people in construction are starting to adopt them. Now, the challenge with that is we have a lot of technology and people are adopting things at an even faster pace. And in many cases, that technology is adopted in silos. So the owner is using a different tool than the general contractor, than the architect, than the subcontractor. And that's challenging because we're not sharing the information. We're each doing our own little piece of work. We're each working in our own system that makes each one of us maybe a little bit more efficient, but does it make the entire project more efficient? So these point solutions are solving problems, but are they really driving to efficiency, project or company wide? And it doesn't stop there with the adoption of technology. It actually expands even further. Just look inside of your own company and look at some of the tools and some of the technologies and some of the point solutions that you may have adopted over the last 6 months or even over the last few years. You probably can look and see within different parts of your company, whether that be pre-construction, the back office, your field representatives, your VDC department. Heck, we all know accounting is using something different than the rest of us in many cases. So we have our own silos inside of our own companies. And the lack of connectivity between these solutions and these technologies is significantly holding us back. And for that reason, projects tend to suffer. Because of this siloed approach, teams become disconnected. There is fragmentation and delay in the visibility of the information that you have. You have multiple tools used to do the same job, which oftentimes contributes to multiple data entry, differing answers to the same question because they're in different systems, so erroneous and inconsistent data. And the difficulty of connecting the people who are actually performing the work out on the job site back to the office and to those who are driving the decisions in many cases. Now, none of that is equal to the reasons that we wanted to adopt technology. It is not helping us with communication and collaboration. It's not helping us have better visibility and more real time on projects. And it's certainly not helping us streamline our workflows when each one of us has to do work 2 or 3 times because there are multiple systems to input the information to. So we really need to figure out how we can get towards those single sources of accurate data and really make sure that we're doing a better job of capturing that information one time where it matters most in many cases, which is out in the field. Now, many of us are still struggling to get a lot of the insights and information we need because of all this disconnected data. And that is in many cases because we've been either forced into or we've chosen to take a somewhat patchwork approach, right? We have adopted technologies at different times. We have grabbed what we need to solve a problem today, and it solves that problem without a concept of what might be best for the entire company or the entire project. And that really leads to even more of those things that I was talking about, that erroneous data, that difficulty of connecting, right? But what is really powerful, and we're seeing a lot of adoption of, is a more platform approach. Now, I've talked to a lot of general contractors and specialty contractors and CIOs of these companies, even those in operational excellence or in their VDC departments. And many of them tell me that they're really a big fan of having a more platform approach where they can use the technologies that they need, some of them that may be cutting edge, and some of them that are available to certain stakeholders, but they need to be connected, right? They need to be secure. They need to be something that they know is a single source of truth that many different stakeholders can tie into. And more importantly, they need to be open and flexible so that they can make them work the way that they need them to work and with other systems that they need them to work with. Now, when you think about that, that's often challenging because I think many of us think as technology as sometimes the differentiator on how we run our businesses. And I used to always tell people inside of my firm, it is not the tech that we use, it is how we use that technology. It is how we get that adoption. It is how we drive the workflows that we need. And it is our ability to deliver more value to our projects because we're leveraging that technology. And we need to focus on starting to connect the entire project team. Everyone needs to have a way to connect information that they don't have to do it 3 or 4 times, that they can get information in real time, that it can span across companies and team members and locations. We all have different needs of the same data, but we need to be working off, in many cases, that same data set in that same place, right? And the only way that we can really do that is to have a connected system, to have a platform that can connect all of those things. Now, there are many different approaches to this, right? You can do custom integrations. There can be out-of-the-box integrations. When we look at many of the platforms outside of construction, we see things like Amazon, I'll talk about that a little bit more, or some of these other platforms, everything plugs into them. And that's so incredibly important because it allows you to choose the workflows and your project teams to choose the tools that they need so that they can get the most out of them. Now, at Procore, we have chosen to really adopt this methodology. It's one of the reasons, and I have to put this slide in there because I'm the marketplace guy and this is what I love, right? We've chosen to deliver an open API and access for customers and, more importantly, developers and third-party software vendors to come and plug into. Now, that's really interesting because in many cases, there may be 4 or 5 tools that do the same task. And the question is, which one do you use? And it's okay to ask that question because it may be a different answer on certain projects. And it may be a different answer depending on who the stakeholder is. One might be more suited towards the field, and the other one might be more suited towards your accounting department. But what's important is that the data and information is being passed between those systems, and that doesn't have to be done 2 or 3 times. And it's available transparently to all parties that need it, and that it's in real time so that we're not making decisions on information that was collected weeks ago. We're making decisions based on information that was fed to us from a stakeholder who is looking at the problem out in the field or is performing the work immediately prior to it. And that's why we've put so much effort, and I've put so much heart and effort into making sure that we integrate with all of these great technologies across the globe, because we know each one of them brings its own style of value and its own workflow and its own stakeholders to the table. But we can connect a lot of that information together and provide value for the entire project or the entire company. And our customers have told us that this is valuable to them because they're leveraging those integrations and they're leveraging the ability to connect and the ability to drive that information into the hands of those who need it. Now, you heard me mention that, platforms are changing the world, right? And they're not just changing the world in construction, they're changing the world. Many of you are probably sitting there today on Zoom or on a platform watching me talk to you from halfway around the world. Now, this has transformed the way that we meet. It's changed the way that we conduct business. and the way that we get things done and the way that we collaborate. Now, Zoom doesn't stand on its own. It connects into other systems. It connects into my email client. It connects into my phone system. This way I know it connects into my CRM so that I can invite people to the meetings. There's so many different ways that it ties into other platforms to enable us to do the work that we do. And if you've bought anything off of Amazon, you know that Amazon has changed the way that we buy, especially when we couldn't leave our house and we couldn't go to the store and shop anymore. What did we do? We went to Amazon and we bought it. Now that has connected sellers of materials and goods. It has connected marketing agencies on ways to boost those Amazon stores. And it has really saved a lot of small businesses, along with things like Shopify, on how they sell their products, right? So platforms aren't just changing construction, they're really changing the world. And that's why we need a strong platform and why we need to take platform thinking into construction technology. We really need to focus on our ability to deliver value by connecting solutions and to build workflows that are extremely valuable, not to just us as individuals or as one contractor, but to the entire project. And that's how we're going to bridge the gap and build the next generation of construction and the next generation of the built world. Now, one thing that I thought this quote was very meaningful and very telling is that there's a lot of technology. It's everywhere. That doesn't mean that it comes with value, right? And as I mentioned before, it's not just about what technology you're using, but it's about how you're using it. And it's about how you're connecting it to the other stakeholders to provide value. And so when you start to sit back and you start to think about what are the tools that I'm going to use to do my job, focus on where the value is, and then select the tools and build the workflows that drive that value. Now that will lead you to better projects. It'll lead you to eliminating risk. It'll lead you to having happier customers, whether your customer is the owner or the head contractor, or the customer is your employee who you want to keep happy just by making their job a little bit easier. But each of those things that we focus on come from being able to drive value by connecting systems and workflows. And we think that one of the best ways to do that is to take a platform approach to all of that technology. Now, I know I'm a few minutes early on ending here, but I did want to leave a lot of good time for questions and answers. So I am going to go ahead and open up for Q&A. And please, there's no question that I will try and answer them all. And if I don't know the answer, I'm okay to say I don't know, but I will get you an answer.
Awesome. Thanks, Kris. Yeah, look, I'm really interested in this. Obviously, as someone who's a futurist, I work a lot with organizations around technology adoption, and I love the stuff that you're talking about. I'm just interested. I mean, you made the point that, platforms like Microsoft Teams and stuff have kind of suddenly taken a massive leap forward in terms of adoption since the beginning of COVID. And I mean, outside of obviously your own platform, outside of kind of Procore, I'd be interested to know what are the platforms that you would really love to see adopted more fully than perhaps we're seeing at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Teams, and I think it is probably one of the top ones that I'm really excited to see more adoption of in our industry, right? We say Teams, a lot of people think of maybe the meetings or just the chat. But let's broaden that out a little bit more, and let's talk about just more real-time document collaboration. So whether you're doing that in Microsoft's Teams through their Office 365 and co-editing documents at the same time, or you're doing that in G Suite and you're editing a spreadsheet and a Google Doc all at the same time, I think something that our industry has been hesitant to adopt is that real-time immediate collaboration. And I think there's a lot of reasons why, right? It comes back to trust, right? When you talk about sharing documents and sharing information, you're talking about the ability for someone else to see exactly what you're doing, when you're doing it, and immediately get a notification that it happened. And that can be scary, especially in our industry. I mean, construction is a traditionally litigious industry. So we love version control. We love the ability to lock something down and hand someone a copy that they can't do anything with because we think it's safer. And so when I look at collaboration platforms, I think about the ability to collaborate in more real time. And I think it's also one of the things about Teams or Slack, right? And communications platforms in construction. A lot of people get very scared about the fact of the conversations that are going to happen in that messaging environment. Is that captured? What if somebody says something and it's wrong and somebody makes a decision off of it? Well, the reality is they're having those conversations anyways. It's probably just in WhatsApp or text message, or they're calling each other on the phone. At least if you're leveraging one of those collaboration platforms that talks around messaging, for example, like Slack or Teams, you have the ability to have a historical record of it. You have the ability to bring somebody else into the conversation without having to catch them up later, right? So I'm really excited about those type of real-time collaboration platforms because I think they will truly accelerate how we work together and how we deliver value to other individuals. I would say the other thing that is really interesting to me, and this might just be like because I'm a little bit of a BIM nerd and things like that, is the concept of like digital twin platforms and IoTs, right? Like I'm a data and nerd and BIM nerd at heart, and so like digital twins are like the marriage of those two things, and they're not new. They're just newer to our industry, right? They've been in manufacturing. This came from the airline industry and from Boeing engines, right? So there's a lot to be said there. And I'm really excited for platforms like that to make an evolution, to be able to collect that data and information from many different stakeholders throughout the entire process. And those are great examples of platforms of, some people call them asset information management systems, some people call them digital twins, but just this concept of a platform to collect data from many different stakeholders throughout the entire process, and that everybody has access to that in some form. Could be just read only, which is fine, but they have access to get to that same set of data and information.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting, some beautiful stuff to explore in this space. So I think about the digital twin, and I kind of like the visualization and kind of making that data accessible to people. And it's like it's almost like the antithesis of the Excel spreadsheet, which is like the Excel spreadsheet is like hugely exciting for like 5% of the population, and then the biggest turn off for like 95%. And when you tell the 5% that the other 95% don't actually like digesting information that way, it kind of blows their mind a little bit. They can't believe that other people don't find it as exciting as they do.
Well, it's one of the biggest reasons that analytics platforms have been so successful and really changed the way we look at data, right? Most people hate looking at Excel spreadsheets. Worse than that is the printed out line by line report that comes out of your ERP system, right? I still remember, like I can almost like see it. The president of my construction company that I worked for would sit down at his desk with a ruler, a highlighter, a red pen, and he would go line by line and review cost reports. And I'm going, there is a better way for us to find the outliers. Let's visualize this. And so that's what's really powerful is a lot of these analytics platforms, and I'll call them data and analytics visualization platforms, because what they do is you think about Power BI, you think about Tableau, you think about Looker, all of these data visualization platforms. They provide tremendous amounts of insights to a lot of data and information that we never could get before just by looking at an Excel spreadsheet. And so now we're starting to actually have a lot of that data because we've done a much better job of collecting it from the field and from the office and where the action is actually happening. We're doing a better job of standardizing the way that we collect that data, whether that because there are standards that are being put in place by municipalities and governance, or it's because we're using platforms that help us enforce the data collection. And so now we can really start to gain a lot more of those insights and actually represent them appropriately to other team members that they can understand very quickly without having to pour through all that information and all that data.
You made a really interesting, I love the quote that you shared about tech is everywhere and value isn't. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of, there's a statistic from McKinsey that came out, I think a couple of years ago, that says something like 70% of IT projects fail to deliver against the promised outcomes. So either they cost more than expected, they deliver less value, or they took longer than we wanted. And, you know, like there's clearly, I think there's a lot of barriers that come when it comes to technology adoption. And there's almost like a whole bunch of these unquestioned assumptions that sit there. And you've already mentioned a couple of them. So you mentioned earlier about like there's an assumption that, like for instance, even version control, that our current work, you know, somehow our current approach to version control is less risky than the idea of actually having real-time shared documents and information. Another one I'll just pick up on that you said, I mean, you're obviously mentioning these platforms like say Power BI, Tableau, and I would actually argue that for 90 odd % of our users, 95%, 98% of our users, those terms are meaningless. Like they've got names that are really sound really snazzy and maybe have some meaning to a kind of IT nerd and data nerd. But for most people, when you mention those platforms, they actually have no significance. And I think that the language is a real barrier to adoption. Curious to hear, like from your experience, you know, what are the other underlying kind of barriers that we've either, you know, that still exist or that we've put in place that perhaps stops, you know, these really valuable tools kind of spreading faster?
Yeah, it's a great question. And whenever you talk about those IT projects that fail, right, whether it because they cost too much, they took too long, or they really just didn't deliver on what we needed, I oftentimes ask, like, where did the idea and where did the driver to do that project actually come from, right? And I think one of the biggest barriers for adoption is not actually understanding what the needs of the person who's going to use the technology is. The best way to get adoption is to let that information bubble up and then either be approved or supported by an organization. When I ran operational excellence, which included technology and innovation and BIM and VDC, quality and safety, we were a 100% service-focused org. We did not push our own agenda. We received the agenda from the field and from others, and we executed for them, right? And we had a higher likelihood of success when 5 superintendents came to us and said, we need a better way to get our subs to fill in safety reports, right? Because we knew that they were already bought in, that if we could solve it in a way that they liked, that they would use this. We knew it was a real problem for them, as opposed to sometimes we drive technology adoption from the top down, which is like, hey, we think we have this problem, we're going to put in place a new system to solve it, when in reality, that wasn't the real pain that the field or that the office was actually feeling. And so one thing to focus on is to clearly make sure that you understand the user's true pain and where the true value is going to come from. The second part is that just because it is the new snazzy or the new exciting word or buzzword, like you were talking about Power BI, doesn't mean people understand it or know how to use it. So training and implementation is incredibly important. Getting the technology in place is sometimes the easy part today because things are cloud-based, they're easy to deploy, they're easy to spin up. Sometimes it's as easy as just plugging a credit card number in. But getting adoption because of implementation and training is a lot harder. And so how do you go ahead and have a really good change management plan for rolling those technologies out to your organization? And are they going to understand what it does, right? I couldn't agree with you more on your example of most people probably don't know really what Power BI or what Tableau do. They understand the names because they've heard them before, but they don't necessarily understand it. And so prime example of that is my former president, the one that would go through the spreadsheets. We built him dashboards to do that. And he still, if I asked him to open up Power BI, would probably not know which tool that was and where to go. But I said, hey, just go to the cost reporting dashboard. He knew what that was. and he needed it was a way for him to visualize it. So you've got to find ways to connect the technology to their daily workflows. And that's where I was really starting to stress the idea of it's not just about delivering technology, it's about delivering the value on improving the workflow. It's how you use it, right? And so just having access to it, you can't just go and say, here you go, here's the whole Microsoft Teams suite, go and use it. Nope, that's not going to work. You got to go in and you got to say, okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change how we submit budgets using shared Microsoft Excel files using Microsoft Teams. And this is what you're going to do. And we're going to change this workflow. And the next thing you know is that they understand the workflows and the work products that they need to deliver. And they understand that they're using a new tool to do it. But it's not just a mass, hey, here you go and go figure out what it's going to be useful for you for. It's more of a, okay, we found a tool that's going to be really useful to help you solve this pain point along this workflow process. And that's where it's so important. I was talking to a CIO of a very large general contractor in the US, and he's the one that actually used that quote. And he said, listen, we don't do anything that doesn't have 4 or 5 use cases ready to go out of the box when we deploy it, right? A pilot is one thing, go test it. Let's understand if it's going to work. But before we will do a rollout across our entire organization, we need to have 4 or 5 really good work streams dialed in that we can go train the different departments on so that they'll see value immediately. Because if they don't see that value immediately and it just seems like more work to them, they're not going to use it. They're not going to do it. And then you have those failed technology rollouts, right? Because they don't perceive that there's enough value there. And then that makes kind of everybody look bad because we just spent all this money on something, or we just spent all this time and we didn't deliver what anybody was really looking for.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about being able to articulate the value back to the end user rather than just the value of it to the organization. I know Shannon has a question as well for you. I'm going to get Shannon back up on the screen as well. You there, Shannon?
Yeah, here. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Kris. So I've just got a question from the audience that I'll read out in just a second, and just probably a quick comment. I think, Kris, you touched on the fact that, all the information's there when we talk about risk, risk-averse industry and being sort of capturing data and having that transparency. But certainly one of the things I've seen is, there's very, very smart people in this industry and there's a lot of knowledge and expertise there. So, bringing that together and having that transparency and access to information is something that, I think is a key thing. But just coming to a question here, we've got a question from Warwick Stannis. Have you done any research on the ROI on connected construction platforms for specialist MEP contractors?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, as far as where we're delivering that ROI on projects, specifically, obviously, we can research around our own products, right? So we can go out and survey our users and better understand how they're using that connected system, where they're getting the value out of it, and what that actually value means to them. And what we're seeing is for project managers on those MEPs and foremen for those MEP contractors that are leveraging a platform like ourselves, right, are seeing about a 33% reduction in the time that they're spending on those tasks that would normally take them, 12 hours a week are now only taking them 3 to 4. Things like doing, daily log entries, things like reporting on time and productivity, right? Things like reviewing and approving submittals and getting the answers back from folks. And so they're seeing a lot of value because it may integrate into another system that, let's say, the design side is using, so that they don't have to go and download and upload and do the dance of tracking this through the system. They can actually just hand it off to the next party and they get value out of it. So that's probably one of the biggest ROI drivers is the time that we're seeing in the savings of folks. And, a lot of people would go, well, that's great. You're saving our folks in the field time. Does that actually equate to money, right? Because nobody's ever taken a quarter of a project manager off of a project, right? They still need that project manager there. And so what we've seen in a lot of cases, and me personally, I've seen this data and seen the results of this is
being able to take on more volume, more projects with the same amount of people, right? So where we may be worried in the past about our bandwidth and how we were going to staff projects, we were able to increase volume on projects or across the company without actually bringing on any more staff to support it. And that's really powerful. And that's one of the biggest value props that we've seen from folks. I would say, you know, the other side of that is, and this is not a Procore thing, right? Anytime you can accelerate the timeline of when someone can get that real-time information and that more real-time data, you're talking about cutting out the need for waiting, right? And we all know that for a subcontractor, mechanical is a great example. If people are waiting on answers, they're not putting work in place, and that is lost productivity. So if they have the information, everybody wants to show up to the job, have a whole bunch of work to go do, and not have anything in their way. That's the ideal, right? And so if we can get them the answers faster, if we can remove some of those constraints and have the ability to keep them moving, that makes them more productive, and that delivers more dollars to the bottom line. You know, the other factor of ROI here and like true dollars and cents is around risk, right? And being able to reduce the rework that's done on projects. Rework is a massive problem in construction, and most of the rework is contributed to the fact that they had out-of-date information or they didn't have the information that they needed. And so once again, like even if you're not even making them any more productive, if you are making sure that they don't do something because they didn't have the information that they needed, or they didn't have the right information or the most up-to-date information, then you're producing an opportunity for them to reduce the amount of rework. And nobody gets paid to do the same job twice when it was your fault. And so if we can see that reduction in rework, that has a significant ROI impact for a lot of folks when it's more real time, they have the information they needed, and they didn't have to go to 4 or 5 different places to go looking for it.
Awesome. I think that's about all we've got time for, Kris. I've really, really appreciated this session. I think there's some great insights there. And I think for a lot of people in this community, you know, these kind of ideas around kind of technology adoption, how we get the business on board, how we kind of articulate the return on investment is hugely important when we talk about how to get people to collaborate, you know, around the next generation of technology that we're all going to be using.